All right, good afternoon again. Hey, this is Carl Davies here. Welcome again to another edition of Net Generation Parents Lunch and Learn with our two co-hosts. My name is Carl Davies, and I work in the Player and Coach Development Department at USTA National, located in sunny today, actually, Orlando, Florida. Just a few housekeeping pieces to go over before we introduce our two co-hosts. Please put any questions that you might have in the Q&A chat box. A recording of this webinar will be sent out to all registered parties. Thank you very much for joining us again today. We sincerely hope you get something out of this webinar and at the same time impact your child's competitive experiences. Over to our two co-hosts. So starting off with Shawn Foltz-Emmons is a former professional tennis player reaching a high ranking of 55 in the world. She was also a top-ranked collegiate and junior national player. Currently, Shawn is a licensed psychologist with her own business, Advantage Performance Consultants, that currently sits on our USTA Sports Science Committee. Dr. Larry Lauer is a mental skills specialist for USTA Player Development and heads the mental performance team. As a player development team member, Larry has worked with junior, transitional, and professional tennis players and the national coaching staff. He has been a sports psychology consultant for over 2 decades with elite tennis players from juniors, college, and pro. Larry also sits on our USTA Sports Science Committee. So before I start answering some questions, and thank you very much for putting in your questions as part of those registrations, very well received. And we're using those questions to structure our session today. So before we kick off, just again, excuse me, another parents lunch and learn. So the team has got together, and we really felt that we wanted to present this next webinar, showcasing all of the questions that we've received, and all the questions as part of the registrations, and also within the webinars. And we really saw a great need, or a lot of questions centering around stress and anxiety around competition, particularly, about the nervousness of your kiddos. So without further ado, we're going to go to Larry for the first question. Larry, could you set the scene for us in terms of our first question? What is the origin of anxiety?
Yes, thanks, Carl, and thanks everyone for signing on. I think it's important to know where anxiety or nerves, you want to call it, come from, because it gives you a better sense of what it actually is. And we can think of our anxiety as sort of having a lot of energy or activation, and then you add doubts to it. Like, it's good to have a lot of energy when you're going in a tennis match, but when you start doubting yourself, that's when it becomes an issue. So more of that anxiety picks up then when you start to have those doubts. So anxiety comes from uncertainty what's going to happen in the match, uncertainty on how you're going to play, uncertainty about the outcome, all these things. So we try to find certainty and understand, okay, well, where does that uncertainty come from? Well, if you understand, that the anxiety comes from when you're experiencing demands to perform that you feel are greater than what you can handle. And those demands have important consequences. So the more that the player understands that this is something I can deal with, and I've worked for this and I've trained for this, and we focus them back on what they know or the facts, what they're certain about, I think that reduces a lot of those nerves or anxiety they feel, Shawn. So the more we can focus them on the training that they've done and trust in that, or their game plan, or even as simple as, yeah, I'm really nervous, but I know I can hit a forehand cross court all day long and I can focus in on that. I feel that a lot of times that helps them to start to settle down as we talk about and get into the match. What do you think, Shawn, in terms of your thoughts on anxiety in general?
So I think anxiety in particular is something that we're all going to have. And so it's important to acknowledge that this is just going to be present going into a competition or even going into a test at school. In general, we all want to perform at our best. And so I think a big part of being able to manage the anxiety is understanding and just acknowledging and accepting that it's just part of what's going to happen. And so, but instead of looking at anxiety as sort of an opponent, look at anxiety as sort of your teammate. And so be able to say, okay, I'm anxious and I'm going to be able to perform well. So changing your mindset, being able to control your thoughts and the narrative about the feeling that you have is really important. So again, and also talk about it. You know, the more you talk about something, the less power it has inside your body. And so being able to focus on the process, but also to practice, like practice daily on how to manage the anxiety. One thing that I recommend is really focus on getting a lot of sleep. I think sleep is really important to help manage anxiety. And secondly, being able to keep a notebook. So for example, if you're in a match and you start feeling anxious, have the tips and techniques and strategies that work for you on court with you. Because sometimes when we're anxious, we kind of forget our focus. And so if we have something we can go to remind us, it's a really helpful grounding technique to help reduce the anxiety you may be feeling in the moment.
That's such a great point, Shawn. You're seeing pros now actually taking notebooks onto the court for their matches and looking at their pages during changeovers. And it's certainly something that's not so weird now that people won't do it.
Right. I mean, even if you like going into a match and having a 1 or 2 mental goals is really important because that keeps it simple. It keeps the focus going forward and trying to realize that the anxiety is only a feeling, right? And being able to change your mindset and maintain your positivity, that it's not something that necessarily is going to detract from your performance, but you can use it to help your performance. So instead of it being a negative, turn it into, okay, well, this is energy. I need to manage my energy throughout the match or throughout the practice. And so it's not an opponent. Use it as something that's a teammate.
One of the things, Shawn, I like to talk to players about is how excitement and how closely related or it feels similar to anxiety or nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And all that energy you have when you're excited about something important. And if you can focus on what you know, the facts, I've trained, I'm ready, I'm fit, you know, I know what my goals are, I know what my game plan is, you can really start to quiet a lot of the doubts, which is, to me, is the key. Like everybody's going to have doubts as long as you don't give them a ton of energy, right? Okay, yeah, I'm going to have doubts. You know, Olympic sprinters on the blocks at the Olympics have doubts. They start thinking about how they're slow. They're the fastest human beings in the world, but our brains like tricks. So the more that we can focus on what we know and what we trust, then all that energy starts to feel more like excitement than it does like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Am I going to play bad? Am I going to play good? Am I going to win? Am I going to lose? All those things.
Right. If we get in that what if cascade, that catastrophizing, instead, what we can do is like you said, Larry, focus on what we know, focus on what we can do. And when you're on the court and when you're practicing, it's time to practice the mindset too of a champion. And so one thing that I also recommend for parents and for coaches in particular is to share your own experiences with anxiety and what's worked for you. I mean, understand the power that you have as a parent and coach to share things that have worked, you know, and to share that this is something that everybody goes through. So then it doesn't feel as big in the moment. It can feel like, okay, well, this is a feeling and it can pass. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to maintain my positivity and focus on the simple things.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Carl?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Thank you, Shawn. Apologies about the audio. Hopefully this is a little bit better. So moving on to our next question, and again, these came from our registration questions. Maybe starting with you first, Shawn, what should we do about anxiety before a competition, a tennis competition?
So I think one thing that's really important is you practice off the court what you're going to do on the court. And so every day have a goal of how you're going to play. For example, visualize managing your anxiety, visualize hitting your shots well, visualize yourself responding to bad calls or shots that don't go your way. I think that's really important. So visualization, I think it's also really important to maintain a notebook with the notes of what your coaches say, the notes of what maybe quotes that you can repeat to yourself on the court that will be soothing. So practice off the court what you're going to do on the court. So it becomes just a part of your life. It becomes automatic. It's like the more we practice something, the stronger it gets. So if we practice doing things in the wrong way, then guess what? That's going to get bigger and stronger. So we practice managing our anxiety, practice the techniques that help us off the court. On the court, it's going to be more natural and automatic.
Yeah, I love those points, Shawn. We talk about daily mental practice at player development as a way to not only just train our mental skills of breathing, visualization, being goal focused, gratitude, a number of things, but also, as you said, it helps a player understand that there's a way that I prepare mentally and can get my mindset focused on my goals and locked in. And so when I'm nervous or I'm anxious, that doesn't mean that I'm in big trouble. It's just a feeling, it comes with the tournament, but I know how to get my focus. I know how to deal with those nerves. And that's something you practice every day in lower stress environments, and then you put it in stressful environments. A couple of things I wanted to mention, one is we often, like before tournaments, get into this mode of we want everything just to feel right. And then as adults, sometimes we enable that by like, well, let's just stay out here and practice until it's just right. Hey, guess what, folks? Like, it's not always going to be just right. Most of the time it isn't. So we shouldn't expect to feel just right or perfect. We go in, we do our preparation, we get our work done, and we move on, and we go into the tournament with what we have. But I think a lot of times players get hung up on, I need to feel right, when in reality, what they need to do is just compete and just go out and problem solve if you're a little older, or just try hard if you're young, and it's just simple as that. So we're working towards being ready to play versus, oh, I just got to be right. Well, no, probably not going to happen on match day. And anyway, this is a training day. Let's just work on getting ready.
Yeah, great points, Larry. I think also too, I would just add one little piece, which is what we've talked about in other webinars, is to really make sure you insert fun, right? And so remember why you're out there, because you want to learn to play a game that you love. And so the stakes aren't as big if you lose a point, and if you get anxiety, you normalize it and you're like, I'm still out here because I love the game.
Yes, excellent. That brings us back to home base, doesn't it? Sure.
It sure does.
Thank you very much, Shawn and Larry. Moving on to our next question. How do we deal with anxiety during a match? And we get also a few questions centering around during the match as well, how there's certain kids, the parents are relaying, that struggle with closing out the match or lose their way during the match. So maybe we could start with you now, Larry, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. It's a tough question because all players deal with this stress of closing out. And that's one specific component of a bigger thing. And that is, how are you going to respond when you're feeling the pressure, when you're feeling nerves? And I think during the match, the more that you've settled into your routines between points in changeovers, and again, little kids are going to have very simplistic ways of doing this. Maybe they go get a drink, they take a couple breaths, they relax, they towel off, they think of one thing they're going to do when they go into the next game, and that's it. Pros have elaborate routines, right, a lot of times. But I think the more that you have some place to direct your focus that's effective, it's very important. And so that is a piece of that. I think also when we're able to accept, as Shawn's saying, what we feel, but in the moment. So when it's live and it's happening to us, oftentimes before a match, we're like, yeah, I can deal with this. But when we're in the moment, like, oh gosh, it feels so bad, uncomfortable, I'm playing so bad, whatever. To be able to accept these things, then breathing to really kind of reset the system, because what's happening is your heart rate's going up, your breathing gets shallow, so now you start to feel more uncomfortable by how your body feels, not just the thoughts you're having. So you get this cycle going on. So the more that you can breathe and kind of calm the system down, and to do that, big exhales, double the exhale compared to the inhale. So if you're inhaling to 3, exhale to 6, you get that relaxation response. Then start to again refocus on what you know. Maybe you set, like Shawn said, some mental goals before the match, or process performance cues like, hey, for whatever's going on, I'm going to be attacking. I'm looking to get to the net. Okay, great. Calm down. Yeah, I'm a little nervous, but my job is to get to the net. That's what I've been working on, and that's what I want to do in this match. It's not so much about winning or losing, it's doing the things that I've been working on. So if you can create routines that they practice, then they get really good. Kids get really good at being able to deal with their nerves. If it feels new or different or big, then you're in trouble a lot of times. And so that's why you don't save the routines work, as Shawn's saying, for the matches. You do it every day. So when they go to serve and they've practiced it 1,000 times, like, okay, this is what I do. Take a couple bounces, I'm clearing my game plan, I take a breath, we go. And that helps them to be able to manage those nerves in the moment.
Shawn, would you maybe, if I could turn a little bit, have a little bit of a tweak, could you speak to particularly the stress and anxiety, and it's further to our previous webinar that was on cheating. So how could we help our folks out there and coaches in terms of the stress and anxiety around cheating?
So I think there's a number of things. I mean, if somebody else cheats, I think, or you think they're cheating, is to look at it as something that, number one, kind of happens. And so you prepare off the court for, if it happens, you just sort of let it go. And maybe you also think that maybe the person made a mistake, but it's important not to dwell on it and not to make it out to be a big thing, because if you focus on that, then you're going to lose the next point, right? If you're focusing on the fact that someone may have cheated or they're cheating, then you're going to lose the next point or two. And so you do what you can. If it's a grievous call, then maybe you ask for the umpire, but otherwise there's not much you can do. You just let it go. And so you can't let it bother you. It's something that you don't like. It's something that's not pleasant, but at the end of the day, there's really not much you can do. So you've got to just let it go and move on.
Larry, would you like to add something?
Just quickly, because Shawn really talked about it very well. And Shawn and I talked about this last time, is realizing when someone is cheating, what they're saying is they can't beat you straight up.
Correct.
And letting that empower you to continue to play your game, to stay on a higher ground and say, look, I'm not going to fire back at them and cheat them, because I don't want to have that in my character. I want to do things the right way. So so if you're really sure that they're cheating, still remember then, that, okay, that's a sign of what's going on with them. I'm going to show strength and I'm going to stay with my game, because what they're telling me is my game is too much for them to beat me straight up.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just got a question from somebody, like, how do you tell the younger kids to let it go and move on? And in my perspective, the language you can use with a younger child is, well, number one, practice off the court. Like if this situation happens, this is what I'd like you to do. And then practice it. Practice what you're going to do. And so for a younger person, you can say, whether it's 12 or 10, is, you know what, just focus on the next point. Okay. If you're upset about it, you can tell yourself you're upset, but just move on. Don't respond. Just focus on the next point. Just focus on the next shot. And then in general, things will turn around.
Yeah, good point. You know, I remember, Shawn, I was working with a player and talking about this, and we took, I don't know, we had just a ton of tennis balls and we laid them all out and we said, okay, what if each one of these balls was 1 point in your match? And you felt you got cheated on 2 points. So we kicked 2 of the balls out and said, well, you still get to play the rest of these balls, these points. So don't let these 2 cost you the rest of them. And I think that, you know, with kids, the more that we can make it very concrete and visual, we can reach them in better ways. But what everybody wants to do is to be successful. And it feels really bad when someone's feel like someone's taking your success from you unfairly. And so the more that you can give them back control and understand where their control lies, that's important to me. So
Excellent points.
Moving on to another question. I'm gonna, for the first time, ask 2 questions because they're very close together. I would love you, maybe starting off with you, Larry. We have 2 questions here that I feel, again, quite similar, but would love your insights around this. As a parent, I like to watch my kid during their competition, but how do I get my kid to ignore my presence and just have fun? And I'm going to also infuse another one. How does a coach communicate with a parent who makes their son or daughter nervous in a match? So obviously you can see that similarity from a parent coach perspective in terms of their presence around competition.
Ooh, these are some doozies. Great questions, folks. I'll tell you what, they're coming, the registrants, the folks on here are coming with great questions. So I thank you for that and your participation. Look, you know, obviously children are going to respond differently to certain things, but in general, you know, number one, I think is an overall son of the mentality is this is your game. And there's nothing that I can do from the sideline for you. I don't actually want to get involved. I just want to sit back and watch and enjoy. And so helping them understand it's their game. You got to understand my personality. I was always one who I would never look at my parents. There was almost like no chance I'm looking at my parents. It's my team and me. And I know tennis is different than team sports, but and oftentimes in tennis, you feel like your team are your parents when they're at the matches. So I get that. So there's going to be some of that. But I think the more it's your match, it's your game, go and enjoy it. There's nothing I can do for you from the sideline. I'm just going to clap quietly or whatever. I think secondly, this is more of a training concept, is training the eyes and training the eyes to where they go in the court. So the more the routines are created where the eyes go to the strings, the eyes go to the back of the court. If you watch the best players in the world, their eyes don't leave the court very much. And so really starting at a young age to help kids just keep their focus, going to help them focus more on their tennis, is a big thing. Maybe Shawn wants to tackle that before we go to the coach question.
Could you repeat that last part you'd like me to answer?
Just going, Shawn, just going to the coaching element of that is, how could a coach communicate with a parent who makes their son or daughter nervous in a match?
I mean, I think number one is the relationship, hopefully, is one of trust. And so I think the coach can talk to the parents about how they can support their child. And so one way to help to talk to the parent is to say, okay, well, how are we going to approach this match, or how are we going to approach competition? And so talk about the nonverbals, making sure that you have this sort of neutral, positive stance, paying attention to like, are your shoulders hunched? Are your shoulders back? I mean, those things matter. The kids pick up on the body language even more than maybe things that you can say. And so making sure that what you are showing them is something that's positive. So if the coach before the match or throughout the time they're working with the child, communicate with the parent as if they're a team member, because you guys are on the same team. What you're trying to do is support your child or support the player in this process of trying to have them optimally perform. And so being able to talk to the parent and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be positive. We're going to respond to every shot the same way. Whether they're winning, we're going to be neutral positive. Whether they're losing, we're going to be neutral positive. And this is what it looks like. And so I think sometimes it's easier said than done. But if you have that as a goal, as a teammate, meaning coach and parent, then in general, you're going to have the best kind of outcome.
Thank you, Shawn. Yeah, we keep getting these questions. So if there are a lot of questions coming in, and again, prior to the webinar and also now within the Q&A, is that how could we help our parents, particularly if their players or their children are having really, bad bouts of, stomach ache or stress, all of those, not eating, not sleeping, those drastic situations of the stress and anxiety in the lead up to a competition. Maybe starting off with you, Shawn, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in having a sports psychologist or somebody who can help a person in an environment outside of the court kind of learn to manage those sort of symptoms. I mean, you want to rule out if there's something physical going on, of course, maybe taking them to the doctor to see if there's really something physical. And number two is, consult with a sports psychology provider. Or secondly, talk to them about how, like, where is this coming from? What are the triggers for it? Do you get these nerves when you're going into a test or when you're around your friends? I mean, it is important to be able to identify whether this is a mental health issue that needs additional assistance outside of just the work on the court. And so that's one of my recommendations. I think it's always a good thing.
Larry,
Yeah.
if you don't mind wrapping us up, we're running short on time.
Yeah, sure. Good thoughts,
Yeah.
Shawn. Appreciate that. I would say that with kids, asking a few good questions about their behavior, just because someone isn't sleeping well before a match, I think that's pretty normal. But when it starts to become repetitive, it happens again and again, or it's affecting their functioning, not just in tennis, but as Shawn said, with school or other things, when they have a test. So you start to look for these things, then you might go to another level. But what I always say to the parents is seeing a therapist or seeing a mental coach is great for your children. And not just because I am one, I'm trying to drum up business for people, but it gives them someone else to talk to and share. And it's just a third party who knows how to ask questions to learn more about what's going on. And you should see that as someone is in your corner who wants to help you help your child. And so I know that that's not always easy to find for folks wherever they're located, but certainly we have the capabilities to connect you with people as well that you can talk to. And in general, there's therapists in every town who are qualified to talk to children about the anxiety that they're feeling.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Shawn, for another great edition of Net Generation Parents Lunch and Learn. We will be sending out, don't fret everyone, I saw a few questions come in there. We will be sending a recording to all registered parties, and we will also be sharing the link for people to source previous editions of Net Generation Parents Lunch and Learn. Thank you again to our two co-hosts. It was positive feedback. Thank you to everyone. And we'll see you on next edition of Net Generation Parents Lunch and Learn. Have a great day.